Well, hey everybody. Welcome to the new Unlimited Hangout video podcast. I'm Whitney Webb, founding and contributing editor of Unlimited Hangout.
Hey, Whitney, nice to be here. I'm Mark Goodwin. I also help out at Unlimited Hangout and doing the production for the show. Very fun. Happy to be here on our first episode. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. It turns out you'll be on every episode.
Hey.
Yeah, that's how we planned it. Anyway, so you didn't say it in your intro of yourself, but you also write for Unlimited Hangout
True.
beyond just helping out.
That's true.
And people may have noticed that our most recent article written by you and me about Polymarket created a little bit of a
stir.
A stir. That's the best word for it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, so that happened. But before we get into that, I guess we should talk about why we're doing a show because, I don't know, you may have noticed that there's been videos of me that aren't like videos I have done in the past on YouTube. Of course, that's because they're not me. They're something else.
Oh.
Yeah, well, I've talked about it before. You may, if you follow me on Twitter, X, whatever, you may have seen my pinned tweet, which is about, an AI impersonation problem I've had for a few years. Talked to James Corbett about it a few years ago. But basically, if you've been watching a video of me on YouTube in the past, 2 years, there's a 90% chance I had nothing to do with it, and it's not even me, or it's either an AI me or AI slop of me. So the best way to fight that, I guess, is, we have to make our own YouTube channel to be able to report spam or impersonations on YouTube.
This is how we have to fight the slop-apocalypse in general, is just make original content and do cool stuff. Put yourself out there. Hang out. It's a kind of obviously we write dense articles. We got a lot of dense stuff to talk about today, but
Yeah.
Be original, be sincere, be yourself, and, obviously we're not going to be as, to the point as if we were running some AI slop teleprompter thing, but we're humans, and that's what's cool about us, is that we're humans, and here we are to do some human stuff, and we wrote about some humans with this piece, yes. Hello, fellow humans. And we wrote about some humans in this piece, and obviously we got some interesting reactions from humans when we put out this piece. We want to obviously get into the piece, but we do think it's maybe an important coloring just before we have this discussion of we got a bunch of crazy feedback and a bunch of people said a bunch of mean shit about us.
Yeah, well, it's kind of one of those microcosms of what it's like to make content today.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a writer of long-form articles, as we are.
Yes.
Because people, react intensely without reading anything.
Oh, yeah.
And it's funny because most of that comes from the crowd of people that claim to be against that and claim to be the facts over feelings people,
right.
And are now, since 2024, pretty much the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our article, I guess we should talk about it now for people that haven't seen it, was about Polymarket, the now, almost ubiquitous prediction market platform.
Yeah.
That's done a bunch of media partnerships, and we'll talk about this at a future date because this is part one that we published. We have a part two, but they have plans to change the future of journalism forever, among other things forever. Right. So we'll be talking about that at a future date. Yeah. But part one is basically just about the origins and context that created Polymarket. And so to promote the piece, I mentioned one, I thought, interesting nugget, because it's the most obvious thing, I guess, that Shayne Coplan, the Polymarket founder, explicitly tried to obfuscate from his past. So I made a little note of that in the tweet, being look at what they obfuscated, which was, a tie to a previous company he's never talked about called Token Union or Token Bank, or very, very few articles, and there's been tons written about the guy, reference it, but none really looked in. Even with those references, there was no discussion of the company really at all. So obviously we discussed it, and we one of the things we mentioned in the tweet, or I mentioned in the tweet, was that it was intimately integrated with and connected to Bancor, which was co-founded by Benjamin Netanyahu's niece and nephew. And so, like, because of that, even though later on in the tweet I talked about what the article's really about, which is how Polymarket is essentially a privatized DARPA program from the early 2000s. So it's really about DARPA and, like, the Peter Thiel verse and U.S. intelligence. People just assumed it was all about, like, Israel, and so we got a lot of accusations about being anti-Semitic and, like, and just other stuff that wasn't really related to the piece at all. No. So it's just kind of one of those examples where people, like, harp in on something, and of course the people that were most mad are, like, either Polymarket fanboys or employees of platforms that are partnered with Polymarket, X itself, or formerly Twitter, being a big one. And so Nikita Beer, is that how you say his name?
I don't know.
that guy.
Called you mentally ill.
A lot of people that were triggered by it that also admittedly didn't read the article called us mentally ill. Which, it's just, Whitney was just using an example basically to say this guy's origin story is full of shit. Which it is, and the example she happened to use involved the name Netanyahu and Israeli VCs. It's true, though.
And Israeli interests. These advisors that were at that company he was doing before Polymarket. All of it is true. The article has absolutely nothing to do with Jews or Israel or whatever. It's ridiculous. Read the article. It has way more to do with the privatization of military programs. And so we're getting into all of that right now. But we wanted to just start that off at the top. It's like one of the reasons why we're doing this show in general, despite the AI impersonation thing that Whitney talked about, is like people don't read that much. And we want to make sure that, we're able to explain ourselves and tell the story for those that don't read. So the secret history of Polymarket, part 1. From UnlimitedHangout.com, from Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin. Here we are. So I guess a good place to start is just like, what is a prediction market, I guess? And this idea of a prediction market is, well, hey, let's set up a market just like we have for financial products, commodities, currencies, stocks, equities, bonds, whatever. Let's create a market just like that, buyers and sellers, but for, predictive outcomes. So, World Cup's blowing up right now. So, Argentina, will Argentina win the World Cup? Yes or no? It's this binary outcome, and you can vote on who's going to win the World Cup. Is Argentina going to win the World Cup? And you can buy essentially like shares in the yes or shares in the no. And then, of course, there are non-binary outcomes like, who will be the next Fed chair? Kevin Warsh or, Nancy Sheldon, Judy Sheldon or whatever. And, there can be more than 2. There can be like 4 or 5, and you can buy shares based on that. So prediction markets are sort of a simple idea, but with really crazy consequences and intentions and just, real world applications that are very interesting, and that we're going to get into all that. Before we get into all that, of like where it's going, which is mostly what part 2 is going to be like. We kind of have to explain like who created these, where did they come from, and what are they doing now.
Right. So, as we note in the article, basically the first prediction market came out in the late 80s, University of Iowa. It was like an academic experiment, and they got a waiver from the CFTC to operate their prediction market as long as it was run solely for academic purposes. And I think experimental purposes also.
Yeah. But so, and then the timing on that, it was founded in 88 or started...
I forget the exact year.
A little bit before, but it was around the first Bush senior...
Yeah, the 1988 presidential election, which is interesting because even like years later, Polymarket, its rise to popularity is generally also coincided with U.S. presidential elections.
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah, smart. Okay, so...
Sometimes.
Anyway, that was basically kind of a closed system. Like anyone could apply, but they couldn't promote it, and the amount of money you could wager on any given thing was pretty small.
It was like a $500 limit.
But then this guy who we'll be talking a lot about, named Robin Hanson, developed this idea called of idea futures in the early 90s. And he had been sort of like a contractor for Lockheed and NASA, writing about AI back then, Bayesian statistics, and some other things. Very interesting libertarian coded thinker, for sure. Very interesting dude. Anyway... He teamed up with these other guys who had read his paper, and in 1994 created the Foresight Exchange,
Right.
which was basically the first iteration of the modern prediction market
Right.
that we know of now, where basically you could bet on all sorts of ideas, right? Essentially, hence idea of futures. But it was play money, right? Not real money. And after that, we basically, just in sort of writing the narrative, there's a couple prediction markets that came up in the late 90s that we didn't include, but are sort of referenced later in the page. And what was Trade Sports? That's it. Because obviously sports betting and prediction markets, since you brought up the example of the World Cup, there's always kind of been a synergy there,
Well, it's the most like straightforward like application of these things, because sports betting is a multi-billion dollar industry. It's really huge. And who runs these casinos? Who's the casino people?
Well,
Who's the,
what I was going to say about sports betting is that there's this really interesting book that I leaned on a good amount for parts of my book, One Nation Under Blackmail, by Dan Moldea, that's basically about how organized crime taking over the NFL.
Right.
Basically because of sports betting. Yeah. So, that nexus explored in One Nation Under Blackmail, obviously in that book as it relates to Jeffrey Epstein. It's basically about intelligence and organized crime.
Right.
They've been really big into sports for a long time, so interesting.
And just casino stuff in general. I mean, that's what that's one of the main ways that these guys, you look at the power nexus that's in power right now. I mean, it's casino guys. It's, Trump blew up.
Yeah, we have a lot to say about that later on, but that might be in the part 2 video. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think the other really big thing to talk about at the beginning of this sort of, is the jurisdictional issues with using, highly regulated currency, right? Like there's a lot of the early digital currency stuff came out of like the poker community. I mean, the original Bitcoin client had a poker client, like remnants of it within the original code. You look at a Brock Pierce, like a Tether founder, and like they're doing all this digital good stuff in like video games, but that whole nexus was all about kind of like getting money offshore via these instruments. And prediction markets, we'll get into a little bit here later, but like they really don't work. They weren't able to be popularized in the way Polymarket is without cryptocurrency existing.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
For a lot of reasons. Jurisdictional reasons, legislative reasons, and also just like 24/7 internet, markets. So a lot of the stuff that these guys were doing early on, they weren't able to scale because they had to be closed boxes because of the way the economics of it worked. And now with cryptocurrency, it's a much open moat, much bigger moat.
In keeping with the chronology here, though, it's interesting you brought that up, because the guy that co-founded the next one that we talk about in the piece is Max Keiser, who's at the time, I think he was at Alex Brown and Sons, which is a bank that we'll have a piece on later this year about because of its executives. Who Keiser actually called out at one point. But anyway, he's best known as a Bitcoin evangelist, early evangelist.
Yeah.
An eccentric one at that, but he created this thing called the Hollywood Stock Exchange.
96, I think.
Yeah, with another Wall Street guy, or then Wall Street guy, Michael Burns, who's now best known for like a leading role at Lionsgate Films.
Yeah.
And being a big film executive.
Yeah.
But they created the Hollywood Stock Exchange, which again was still play money.
Yeah.
But it, developed this huge following. People were crazy, obsessed with it.
Yeah.
The ones that were into it, and people were paying real money for these fake portfolios on this play money exchange.
And they created, the patents that basically set up the digital security space. Keiser is very, and I kind of grew up on the Keiser report. I really enjoy his work with him and Stacy on that show. I think they did really good journalism there. But he, and part of his, turning into being a journalist came from his experience with the Hollywood Stock Exchange. So he created like the virtual security specialist patent or something like that. I apologize, Max, for getting that wrong. And then, pretty promptly got in a whole bunch of trouble with even though it was fake money. There was a lot of jurisdictional issues, legal issues with running the Hollywood Stock Exchange, and they ended up kind of tearing it apart, breaking it down into pieces, and the patents and the majority of you know, the users and everything that was on it got shifted over to Cantor Fitzgerald, our boy, our Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, the bagman for Tether. You know, his firm ended up buying it in 2000 or 2001. Yeah. And I think it was like May of 2001. I might be incorrect.
Sounds about right. Mm-hmm.
And then promptly moved all of the IP and everything into the big towers there in Manhattan, or I should say that used to be there in Manhattan. And then a few months later, obviously, the Cantor Fitzgerald office was blown up, and with it, you know, the any sort of further pushing of the Hollywood Stock Exchange, it kind of ended there at 9/11.
Yeah, we'll save the Cantor 9/11 story for another time.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but anyway, basically what Lutnick wanted to do with this is he was like, great idea, but let's take away the play money and make it real money.
Right.
And basically,
not to interrupt, but for you know, Cantor is one of the 24 primary dealers of the New York Fed. They're the largest bond treasury dealer in the United States and therefore in the world for treasury. So him wanting to take this model and apply it with real money is a humongous deal just with who Cantor is.
Right. No, all good. And can I just do my own sidebar and be like, we're one of the few outlets that's been covering Lutnick like a hawk since like the end of 2023 before he was part of the Trump campaign.
That's right.
Yeah, because there's a lot of crazy stuff he's been involved with, even recently, that has not gotten a lot of attention.
Frankly, I think we popularized the he's Epstein's neighbor. I think we kind of blew that up. Anyways, not to toot our own horns here, but anyways, have fun, run with it.
You just a little toot, but
excuse me.
No, it's all good. So basically, Lutnick wanted to usher in this era of a new type of commodity futures, basically film futures. And so obviously his plans were kind of scuppered a little bit by 9/11, and then a few years later, and then a few years later, they relaunched. Or attempted to relaunch, but it was during the 2008 economic crisis, or rather in the aftermath of that. And so, you know, Congress was like not into it because, well, presumably they were like, our constituents will be mad if we approve this. And so eventually in some of the laws that were passed in the wake of the 2008 economic crisis, there was like a lot of like prejudice text against Cantor Fitzgerald's film future plans specifically. Like they literally were like, no film futures ever in it. Yeah. Which is kind of funny, but in trying to get that to happen, he hired lobbyists and some people, and one of the guys he hired was this guy, Rich Jacobs, who now works for Polymarket as like a top guy, was hired like 2 years ago.
Is that a thing that happens, that old guys, like people that worked at Intrade or whatever, end up advising like Augur? What's Augur? Anyways, we'll get into all that. But it seems to be kind of a reoccurring thing where all of these early 90s, like early technological iterations of this, they like bring all these guys back in and then they do all this stuff later. It's so interesting. It's probably not a it is a coincidence, I mean. Anyways, so yes, Hollywood Stock Exchange sort of wraps that kind of thing up there.
So anyway, 2001, right, is when where we were sort of a second ago with Cantor and Hollywood Stock Exchange. So 9/11 may have scuppered Cantor's plans, but it supercharged the plans of someone else to get into the prediction market space, which is the U.S. military. DARPA. What do you mean?
The U.S. military took advantage of 9/11 to push initiatives that they had been planning for an extremely long time. I don't think that you're allowed to say that on YouTube.
We'll find out.
We'll be right back.
So after 9/11, there was this push to basically do a bunch of insane things on the part of the national security state to prevent another 9/11 from ever happening again. Even though, sorry YouTube, I'm gonna get that little thing under it about 9/11 and conspiracy theories.
Yes, you are. Do it.
Yeah, the national security state of the U.S. At the very least helped 9/11 happen. So then, sorry.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Let's say that.
I believe that, and I think there's copious evidence for that, as opposed to Osama bin Laden with the 1980s cell phone.
Do your own research. We'll get a mark on our account for another
our
video
first episode.
Yeah.
I'm
3 marks and you're out.
This is why Real Me is better than AI Me, because I get the under my videos.
AIU is like total.
I don't know. I don't want to watch it. I haven't seen it. I just have.
Yeah. Long story short, 9/11 happened.
Yes.
Whatever happened, but it happened.
Anyway, the U.S. national security state manufactured consent through 9/11 for all of the stuff they'd wanted to do before.
Right.
And there's a litany of things that fall in that category, one of which being the Department of Homeland Security, which they had introduced legislation for in January or like February 2001.
Right.
So there's all sorts of stuff in that category. But after 9/11, there was something they wanted to do. Also, they justified after the attacks that was really the resurrection of something that was going on under Reagan in the 1980s, or the Reagan-Bush administration. And so it's no surprise then that someone that was a holdover from that era, at least rather the Bush senior administration, because it was Reagan-Bush and then Bush senior, Dick Cheney, who had been...
Love that guy.
Oh my God. Defense Secretary under Bush Sr., obviously Vice President under George W. Bush. He's the one that pushed for this guy named John Poindexter, who had previously been the top official in the Reagan administration, indicted for his role in Iran-Contra, having come lead this office at DARPA, a brand new office that had actually been Poindexter's idea. Called the Information Awareness Office, that I've been pretty much writing about for 6 years on and off. But what's interesting about this is that a lot of the stuff that's in the Information Awareness Office actually goes back to stuff that Poindexter, as basically being Oliver North's boss in Iran-Contra, was helping facilitate. And these are very controversial things from Iran-Contra that aren't talked about a lot because it's misremembered, I would argue, as a arms for hostage scandal. It's really much bigger than that in interfaces with a lot of other scandals of that era, BCCI, among other things. If you want to know all the details of that, you can read my books. But basically, one of the things that he wanted to do there and was overseeing with North was continuity of government protocols, the goal of which was basically to label American citizens as dissidents and create sort of a way to deal with unrest or even massive nonviolent protests against U.S. military intervention abroad, deal with all of these things by creating a list of Americans that could be have their rights suspended, basically, if the government wanted to. And so that is intimately related to at least some of the projects that the Information Awareness Office later went on to pursue. So, it seems pretty clear to me that Poindexter was brought in to resurrect that stuff that had sort of been scandalous back in the 80s. Now that enough time had passed and people were very stressed about national security after 9/11, now was the time.
And this isn't just like a theory you have. I mean, this is stuff that like these guys are stating like overtly, like whether it's in the private sector or like at the Pentagon, but like folks like Larry Ellison, who's in that middle ground of like he's technically private sector, but like Oracle started as Project Oracle in the CIA, and he writes this big, piece. I feel like we've brought this up a bunch of times, but wrote this big piece, in the New York Times about, how like we need a national database, like days after 9/11 for national security. We need this this database of everybody.
Yeah, so that's interesting you brought that up. Yeah, so the big narrative from the people that were intimately involved in 9/11, like the CIA and co., was like after 9/11, they were like, oh, well, the reason this happened is because not all of our databases aren't really mushed into one giant database. Yeah, so the push for that has been going on.
It was a data issue, which leads into so perfectly into what they want to use with prediction markets.
Yeah, and actually Poindexter, before this push after 9/11, had been working for 6 years on this DARPA program, specifically about how to manage data if it stopped being siloed data, called Genoa. So anyway.
Sounds like a nice salami. Genoa.
Okay.
Keep going. We'll cut that. Nah, leave it in.
That's fine. Remembering what I was talking about. Yeah, so this office he made, or that was made for him, courtesy of Cheney, the Information Awareness Office, creates all of these different programs, one of which was Genoa 2, with the goal of obtaining total information awareness, which, as the name sounds, awareness of all information, period. So this was basically a huge dragnet surveillance program that was going to suck up everything about every American they could possibly obtain data-wise. And obviously this is in the early internet. So they knew where the internet was going, because the internet was also out of DARPA and is basically a military project in its own right. But basically scupper up all of this, hoover up all of this data on Americans from, not just your like finances, but like what you're reading and consuming, what food you're buying, what medication you're on. I mean, pretty much everything you can think of was supposed to go into this, and it was the way they said they were going to stop terrorist attacks from happening again, was harvesting all of this data and then searching for anomalies in that data. And then going on to predict, which is the key point here, predict in the context of Polymarket, predict what would happen before it happens. So prevent terrorist attacks before they happen. And there was also a subsect there to prevent pandemics before they happen. And because they wanted to surveil the wastewater and the sewage, which now they did under Trump last time in 2020 under COVID. Have an article about that. But basically, it was a huge, insane dragnet, and all of these different programs within it were meant to interface together and then be sort of, the jewel in the crown was TIA, Total Information Awareness, which was meant to plug into all of these different things and then, assess the data and decide who's a terrorist and who's not, basically, based on all of that data. And so one of the programs within the Information Awareness Office was called Future Map. And within that, there was another program called the Policy Analysis Market.
Yes, or
and
PAM.
PAM. Sorry for all the acronyms, guys, but that's what happens when you talk about government stuff. They're very acronym happy. Yes. So then PAM was, they brought in none other than Robin Hanson, who we mentioned a bit ago, to be basically the system architect of that. And there was also another company involved in another iteration that were all the people from the University of Iowa First Prediction Market. They were kind of involved too. And then InTrade that you sort of brought up, they were consulting and advising. So this was more or less the people involved there. And basically the policy analysis market originally was going to focus on more than just the Middle East, but because, they were trying to get a lot of their data from the intelligence unit of The Economist, the paper. They found their services very costly, and so instead of doing the entire world, focus on 8 countries in the Middle East because 9/11, the war on terror, the focus was on the Middle East,
Iraq, Afghanistan,
and so and so they basically created an idea futures market about these countries, but it wasn't just, it was about all sorts of things, economic indicators, but also political ones, and then how those would combine. So it was technically a combinatorial market. Which Hanson had also done a lot of work on previously. And so basically you have, PAM attempting to launch and drumming up interest. They originally wanted to have people from, the CIA and intelligence community be the people participating in the market. But they say they couldn't get enough interest, or rather that they couldn't have agencies compete at first because of issues with transferring money between federal intelligence agencies, and then tried to do it all within one intelligence agency and didn't find any interested players. And so they went straight to the public, and that various, insiders or experts were allowed to participate. But it never actually launched, right? There was a big uproar about it because a couple of senators found out and did a press conference. They branded it the Terrorism Futures Market, and then after that, just infinite negative press.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that, that just you're in the public and you don't know anything about these things, and then you see it's like DARPA is doing a market where you could bet on the next 9/11. I mean, that's basically what they said, and also kind of basically what they were doing.
Yeah,
but the idea is, hey, the markets are always perfect and always right.
The wisdom of the markets.
Wisdom of the markets.
A way to harness the collective human, the wisdom of
crowds.
Right.
Yes.
And I mean, there is something to that and like collective humanity and whatever, but I think in the hands of people like John Poindexter, a literal Iran-Contra felon who was like head of that or de facto head of that shadow government and like an insane scandal that involved intelligence and organized crime and the same people that brought you Jeffrey Epstein.
Right. And this will be a huge part of part 2, and I think at this point we'll do another pod on part 2 because there's a lot to talk about. But this concept of like the markets can't be wrong, and markets are better than democracy, and that's why we should use the information of markets and the wisdom of crowds to like dictate policy. It doesn't really make sense when you consider that like every market in the world is like incredibly rigged and controlled, and so. And who actually gets
and some of the people that are exactly that are big investors in Polymarket
now. So that's a big issue with this whole concept. This isn't really about that concept. We'll get into that in part 2. But anyways, yes, you're right. So in July 2003, the Terrorism Futures Market idiom gets thrown out there, and these two centers, they get it shut down, and they end up shuttering this whole idea, and all of these guys that maybe started in the private sector, then got sucked into the Pentagon, are now free to go out into the private sector, right? So we're at this kind of point where like the Information Awareness Office couldn't be more scrutinized by the public. But it's not like DARPA and the Department of Defense, now Department of War, was just like, oh, but these were bad ideas and let's not do them. They're like, no, these are great ideas and we want these ideas to happen. And if a couple dingbat senators are going to blow this up for us, well, we'll take it right out of the public sector and we'll toss it into the private sector.
I mean, more or less, that's what happened, So a lot of my work the past few years in talking about the Information Awareness Office has been about specifically how several programs at that office were privatized.
Right.
Largely with the involvement of Peter Thiel, friend of the show. No, and so he, so the first time I wrote about this was in 2020 when Palantir got all the warp speed contracts. And so, basically what I was pointing out there is how Palantir is privatized total information awareness, and it was designed to be so.
Yeah.
So when TIA was starting to become under scrutiny, they went to Congress and changed the name to Terrorism Information Awareness, trying to be like, oh, we're not trying to spy on all Americans.
Totally.
But yes, we are.
Yeah.
But
just terrorists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're all terrorists now.
Yeah,
I mean, it was just a name change, but the program was meant to be the same.
Right.
And so Congress, because of the scrutiny and the public backlash, they defunded information awareness. But what actually happened is that they didn't actually end the programs. A lot of them were moved to different agencies in the national security community. There was a provision for that actually in the legislation. So thanks. But no thanks, Congress.
Yeah.
Basically total information awareness. As soon as that name change happened, Peter Thiel comes, fresh off of selling PayPal to Pierre Omidyar.
Yeah.
And he's got all this money, and he's like, I'm going to make this company called Palantir. And Palantir, as we've written about before as well, had really started off as the anti-fraud algorithm at PayPal.
Yeah.
Named Augur.
Yeah.
And as we've talked about, well, I guess not on this show since this is the first episode,
right.
But when PayPal was being created, Max Levchin sort of gave it away.
Yeah, he did this interview with Charlie Rose, actually around this time, and he said that, hey, when I was developing all the anti-fraud stuff at PayPal, I was working with every 3- and 4-letter agency that I could, meaning, the CIA and the DOD and DARPA and whatever. And, they were some of the most fruitful business relationships I ever had, yada, yada. So they form PayPal in the late 90s. They're the first company to go public after 9/11, in the dot-com boom. And then they make a bunch of money, and it's Thiel and Levchin, admittedly working with the CIA and NSA, while developing these anti-fraud stuff. They create Augur, which is named after this Russian fraudster who was just toying with them, and they figured out a way to defeat this guy. And then they take that algorithm, and Thiel, who is buddies with Poindexter, and ends up kind of being advised by him, and he takes that anti-fraud algorithm, which was built with the CIA in the private sector, and then rebrands it as Palantir. I mean, so this is getting shut down in July 2003, and Palantir is coming out, I mean, literally the exact same time. Right?
Well, I think they were incorporated even earlier.
Right.
It was around the name change. But basically, as they're setting it up, they go through Richard Pearl, who was involved with the Bush era Department of Defense, and I believe the Office of Special Plans.
Okay.
And he was basically this arch neocon that has this long history of
neocon.
He is, though. I mean, he's like one of the key neoconservative guys. I mean, he was also in talking about bridging U.S.-Israeli national security interests, back in the 80s, and has all this very controversial history.
Yeah.
Basically being a de facto, more or less a spy for Israel in Congress when he's an aide to one of the main early neocon congressmen or senators. I forget which one he was. But Pearl, is in the office or involved with the Department of Defense, and he's approached by Peter Thiel and Alex Karp. And they're basically like, we want to talk to John Poindexter because what he was trying to do is what we want to do. I mean, and this is admitted in mainstream media. So please don't tell me this is a conspiracy theory. This is literally what they plan to do. And then they go and meet with Poindexter, who becomes named basically the godfather of modern surveillance because of this.
Right.
And advises them on how to create Palantir, and then Palantir gets in bed pretty much right away with the CIA via In-Q-Tel.
Right.
And Karp has admitted that the CIA was always the intended client of Palantir. They were their first and only client for their first 6 years as a company.
There's also this amazing Ask Me Anything on Reddit where Peter Thiel gets asked, is Palantir a front for the CIA? And he responds, no, the CIA is a front for Palantir. Now, obviously, he's being a little cheeky, but is he? Is he being that cheeky? As we've now seen, since obviously he was onto something there. Another point that I wanted to mention, Poindexter is coming from this lineage of Navy intelligence, where it seems like there's this nexus of a lot of these guys, whether it's L. Ron Hubbard or maybe even some people related to Sean Parker, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But anyways, TIA basically is the privatization, or rather Palantir is the privatization of TIA. Thiel is the, no pun intended, the point man alongside Poindexter for that. And then what does he immediately get involved with after that? Yeah,
so in 2004, there's another LifeLog program that gets, LifeLog program. LifeLog is a DARPA program that gets shuttered in the wake of the TIA explosion.
Right.
It shuts down the same day that Facebook is launched, and the project manager of LifeLog, Douglas Gage, later on was like, Facebook is exactly what I wanted LifeLog to end up becoming.
Fun.
Interesting that. And then Peter Thiel, fresh off of privatizing total information awareness. And there's some detail we didn't get into there, like the involvement of Alan Wade and how that ties in with all this other stuff, and how the CIA had intimately been involved with TIA. And that's why you have the CIA and Palantir coming together so early, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so
read the article. It's all in there.
Totally. So LifeLog was basically a way to create, the goal was to create basically a narration of a person's life in episodes, basically a surveillance log of everything you've ever done in discrete episodes that are tied to geolocation, where you are and who you're with photographic evidence and all of this other stuff. So it literally is Facebook.
Right.
But how did that come to be? Well, obviously when Facebook was first launched, it was, amorphous, and there was no, it could have become anything, right? But it was shaped into this because the people that first really funded it are the PayPal mafia. It was Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel.
Yeah.
And
then alongside guys like Ron Conway,
who come from the Parker nexus.
Yes.
And obviously Sean Parker's important to the Polymarket story because Shayne Coplan has gone on and on about the Napsterization of finance, and that's what he is doing.
Right.
And he gave talks about that at his company before Polymarket, and of course after the fact at Polymarket as well. And Sean Parker, before Facebook and being his first president, created Napster. So I'll let you do a little.
Yeah, so Sean Parker, he co-founded Napster. actually, with another Sean Fanning. Interestingly, he just kind of hit him up, sent him an email, and was like, "Hey, we met on IRC. What you're doing is really cool. I want to come out to San Francisco and come check it out and do that." But long before that fateful email and that IRC meetings, when he was 15 and 16 years old, he was accused. I don't think he was like formally charged or anything because he was a minor, but he was like a hacker, and he hacked into like a Fortune 500 company and potentially, reportedly, some military websites and government websites, and he ended up getting his like house quote unquote raided by the FBI because he had broken into some things that he wasn't supposed to, and at that time he became it's quite an interesting recruitment tool for intelligence when you are like a hacker. It's a very like rare skill, and we've talked about this before. But the fact that the FBI raids his house, and as he has admitted, the CIA came and tried to recruit him at a very young age because of this skill. And interestingly, he says that he denied going to the CIA, which is very possible. But much like Levchin, went to the CIA, or the NSA actually, upon graduation from a computer science degree from the University of Illinois, and he went to the NSA and he said, "Hey, USSR fell. I came to America. I found amazing opportunity here. I love America. I want to become an American citizen, and I want to use cryptography for the betterment of the nation." And then NSA was like, "You'll never make a dime doing it that way. You should stay in the private sector if you want to make any money off of this stuff." And then immediately he like flies out, crashes at Scott Bannister's house, who's becomes the first board member of PayPal. He's the VP of Idea Labs, which is the first founder of PayPal, and meets Peter Thiel,
institutional investor.
Yeah, Thiel is the first investor. But when you're like a co-founder, it's not really like investing. It's
Idea
like
Labs.
You just like, yeah, I know, but Idea Labs is the first investor of PayPal, other than Peter Thiel putting in money for them to start the company. And is crashing on Bannister's couch, meets Thiel at Stanford, comes up with some ideas, they start PayPal. Everything that we just said happens right after that. So he literally goes to the NSA, says, "I want to work for you," and they go, "No, go to the private sector." He
go
digitizes
to Scott Bannister's
money.
house and then meet Peter Thiel instead, right. Maxie.
So, kind of a similar thing happened with our boy Sean Parker. He gets arrested, or rather gets, raided. The FBI sends him to do this long community service thing, and ends up meeting a bunch of people, including this girlfriend. He loses his virginity, he claims, because the FBI raided his house, which is kind of interesting. Maybe they're sending him a handler or something. Who knows? I have no evidence of that. But regardless, CIA recruits him for hacking after the FBI raids him. He says no, and he goes. He's in the D.C. area. He was born in Fairfax County, where like Langley is and the CIA is and all this stuff in D.C., because his dad was this longtime government oceanographer who had done all this work for decades with, basically U.S. intelligence gathering information, whether it's climate change or whatever, but oceanography, and worked directly with the Navy and all that. But so he gets recruited by the CIA. He says no, and he goes and joins Freeloader, which is a company by Marcus Pincus, who ends up becoming, extremely famous for, just being a big part of Facebook in general, and later is involved with Coplan and Polymarket, which is why we talk about this. But, he co-founds Zynga, which is a huge part of why Facebook becomes what it is.
Right.
And ends up being, I think at one point, it's like 10 to 15% of all the revenue of Facebook is from Zynga. He's a huge part of the Facebook nexus. And so he goes to Freeloader, and then he goes to Unet, which is the DC-based ISP, the first commercial ISP, internet service provider, that basically took all of these ex-DARPA officials and ex-government officials and privatized, a lot of the technology, commercialized a lot of the technology that was developed at DARPA. Interestingly, the money man behind Unet, Mitch Kapoor, was one of the main guys at Lotus, the co-founder of Lotus. Lotus, of course, very famously, he was replaced by Jim Manzi, who features prominently in the Chain series as being a board member of Ghislaine Maxwell's husband's Cargo Metrics and also of Paxos. Very interesting. And then Bill Gross, who kind of came into this nexus through Unet. And he is the founder of Idea Labs, who ends up being the guy that sort of funds Musk and Thiel and all of these guys very early on. He's the incubator that really takes the privatization of these DARPA projects and blows them up. So very importantly, Parker is already in this nexus, the Pincus nexus, the DC Unet, gross Lotus Mancy nexus. So, very interestingly, Parker is at a very, very, very early age is involved with intelligence and DC-based privatization of DARPA projects, like before even Napster. And then he sends an email to Sean Fanning, moves out to San Francisco, co-founds Napster, and then, of course, ends up becoming this huge mythic internet figure because of what Napster did of breaking down all these barriers of peer-to-peer data sharing, and then what happened with the litigation from the music industry against Napster.
Right, and so basically, in doing that, he develops this Napsterization model.
This model, exactly, 100%.
Which is used by the Thielverse, the network around Peter Thiel, just numerous times. And then obviously when Sean Parker, after Facebook, goes to work for Peter Thiel at Founders Fund, they do it there together.
Right.
But there's a lot of these companies that literally do that. And so it's basically, the analogy is Napster and Spotify, and that's how Napsterization works. You want to explain?
Yeah, so more or less the Napsterization model is create a disruptive technology, which Napster was, a peer-to-peer technology of sending, and also a compression algorithm for MP3s. You can't have the peer-to-peer without the compression algorithm, otherwise there's these huge files. And they basically create this amazing community of people sharing all of this data that's completely illegal because a lot of it is copyrighted data. But they create this whole infrastructure and they don't give a shit. And then, of course, they get sued into oblivion, and the company, it still exists in some form, but, it's not, it's like a legal version of it now. Someone bought the brand because it was a big brand. But basically, Napster disrupted everything, killed the music industry as it stands now, moved everything towards MP3s and streaming. And then years later, after, his joining Facebook was very similar too. He saw the Facebook.com on like his roommate girlfriend's computer and sent an email to Zuckerberg and was like, holy shit, this is awesome. Just like he did with Sean Fanning.
Yeah, and then Zuckerberg's like, come
here. And then he moves in and then he becomes the first president of Facebook. Yeah. Facebook also had a lot of Napsterization issues. Like there was a lot of questionable legal stuff at the beginning. But regardless, Napster obviously implodes, but then, years later, Sean Parker becomes a billionaire from Facebook. He joins Founders Fund, I think, in 2006. And one of the first things he does is he invests a ton of money into Spotify, becomes one of their main advisors. And now Spotify is the ubiquitous, it's taken over iTunes.
It's the descendant of Napster.
Right.
Yeah, but Napster failed so Spotify could succeed.
Right. Exactly.
So the idea is create a disruptive company that is just an experiment. Yeah. Basically, it will fail, but it changes the definition in people's minds of what is normal or what is acceptable, and pushes the envelope with regulation. Yeah. And then at a later date, they come. And now that disruption is done, they come and they install the company or create or find the company they want to use as a vehicle for that. And then they create, as Peter Thiel loves to, monopolies. Yeah. Basically.
And that was what I was going to say. All of these models, they start as a free thing. And then they turn into, Spotify obviously is a paid service. So that's another big part of the model is you disrupt, destroy the market, and then create a paid version of it that is very convenient and legal and all this. And then everyone throws the money there.
Yeah, so keep that model in mind, because Shayne Coplan's whole thing, or I'm calling him Coplan, I don't know. Yeah. His whole thing is the Napsterization of finance and how Polymarket is doing that.
So we're not just bringing all this stuff up because we're crazy and we're conspiracy theorists and all this stuff. We're bringing it up because Shayne himself says, that he is obsessed with the lives of Mark Zuckerberg, Travis Kalanick, who's the Uber founder, and, he starts out, his career basically as an intern at Genius Lyrics.
Or Rap Genius is how it started. He started interning there. So, basically early background on Coplan, whatever. He, felt like he was going to be always outcompeted by his peers, and he basically was like, what he's told in profiles on him since, obviously, is that I needed to find a different way to compete, and he basically does that by becoming obsessed with Mark Zuckerberg and Travis Kalanick in particular, and probably other big tech billionaire founders who he doesn't name, but those are the two he names,
of course,
and that's pretty significant. So at Rap Genius, the goal was to basically, I guess, annotate the web, which is interesting because that was actually what the first search engine that the Maxwell sisters, Ghislaine sisters, created, was also about annotating the whole web. Interesting, but basically, Rap Genius, the goal was to do that. But first, it launched via hip hop, and gained sort of public notoriety and fame that way. But he became the top editors as an intern for the entries of the big tech founders like Kalanick and like Zuckerberg.
And this was a Y Combinator company, correct?
Yeah, it was a Y Combinator company, which is the, I guess San Francisco based.
San Francisco.
Yeah, it's one of the most well-known startup incubators. It's very closely connected to Thiel, at least now.
It's like a new Idea Labs, but like quicker.
Yeah, but they got involved with with Y Combinator in 2011, which is when Conway, who you mentioned, also became involved there, and then Sam Altman, who's at this point widely recognized as a Thiel protege, becomes a partner there, and then a few years later he ends up taking over Y Combinator.
Yeah. So he's obsessed with these guys. He runs into Rap Genius, is like, let me work for you. And then they're like, wow, you know so much about all these guys. You're so cool. And then he, works for them or whatever as an intern. And then I believe at that time, in 2014, he got into the ETH ICO, the Ethereum initial coin offering,
big ETH guy,
and made a bunch of money on ETH, and ended up going to San Francisco to intern at this another startup that was like an ETH-based startup incubator called Chronicle that was San Francisco-based. That they ended up doing some weird like medical chain and MediLayer and some other things. But anyways, he like interns over there, and then pretty much right after that, drops out of college. Makes a bunch of money. He
goes back to New York to go to college and drops out quickly.
Yeah, because he's making millions of dollars in ETH, and he's like, why am I doing this? Like, this is where I need to be. And ends up founding his first company.
Which is called Token Bank at the time, but it later becomes Token Union, and he bills it as Ethereum's first savings account, basically.
So the idea of it is, you hold a bunch of these tokens, right? So ETH is famous for being able to create... it's easy to make tokens. There's this standard on it called the ERC-20s, and you can create these tokens. And his model was, if you hold a bunch of these tokens, we'll give you a yield, and we'll pay you, a percentage to hold a bunch of these tokens. And in that, trying to build that savings mechanism, he ends up partnering with this group that had kind of done a lot of the work before for creating like yield-based stuff. Again, this is before Ethereum is a yield-based proof-of-stake model, which is Bancor, which is, you already mentioned kind of this.
Right, co-founded by Netanyahu's niece and nephew. And interestingly, right before creating Bancor, the niece, the co-founder, Galia Benartzi, she worked for Peter Thiel's Founders Fund. Recurring theme Founders Fund here. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Leading all of their Israeli-focused investments.
Right. And speaking of Israeli-focused investments, a couple other investors, and again, this Token Union, Token Bank, Token Market, these are these are hidden from the story. The story is that Polymarket, was created in his bathroom, all by himself. And the reality is that, no, there was a predecessor company. One of the guys that used to work for this company, who was a programmer there, even says that it's the predecessor to Polymarket.
Yeah, he said Polymarket used to be known as Token Bank.
Right, and a lot of these URLs redirect to Polymarket now, which is really interesting. Yeah,
because it was like tokenunion.io, and then it became union.market, which Coplan says was not related at all to the previous company. He doesn't even ever acknowledge the company's existence, really. He claims it was because of some place he liked to buy like mushroom brioche buns or something. But there's a pretty clear evolution of that. Union, and then it was union.market, then poly.market, and now polymarket.com.
Right. And so one of the other Israeli-tied investors, Lou Kerner, founded this group called Crypto Oracle.
which is seemingly invested in Token Bank or Token Union because they had some private pre-sale that where they netted, I think, $1 million or over $1 million. So obviously he had some connections to be able to do that.
And that guy was a former Idea Labs who helped run .tv in the late 90s. And also has all these ties to Israeli tech.
Yeah, intimately involved in the Israeli venture scene. Very inspired by the Startup Nation book written by Dan Senor, who is a neocon, formerly with Foreign Policy Initiative, which is what PNAC, if you're familiar with PNAC, morphed into was Foreign Policy Initiative.
Right.
And basically their argument is that Israel's startup scene is so great is because basically of civil-military fusion, which is, de facto fascism, basically.
And then other advisors, we had Stephen Narioff, who was, considered the co-creator of, like, the legal architect of the Ethereum ICO. And then we had James Haft, who was an NXTP Ventures guy, who is intimately connected with Diego Gutierrez.
Gutierrez, who's also later becomes an advisor to Token Union.
Right, and we had written about these guys from Debt from Above
2 years ago.
Satalogic play. So check out that stuff. Rootstock is all in there. So anyway, he starts this. He raised millions of dollars. He has all these advisors that are kind of kicking butt, but he sort of just minimizes that this ever happened. And then the story goes that he founded Polymarket in June 2020.
Yeah.
But of course, just not like there's so much missing in this story, even with us putting in the token bank stuff. And the main story that's missing is our boy Joey Krug, who ends up becoming, again, works at Founders Fund and joins Peter Thiel and works closely with Sean Parker doing all this stuff later on.
Polymarket.
Becomes one of the main, seed A investors in Polymarket with Founders Fund. But what he's really famous for, similar kind of story where he's this young guy, he's mining Bitcoin when he's 15 years old in his room.
He loves horse gambling.
Loves horse gambling.
On ponies.
Yes. There's some great pictures of him with horses. It's very funny. He's also an ETH ICO guy. And so he founded Augur in 2014, Augur, Augur, which is another, it's like a Grecian seer, right? Roman, excuse me.
Seer.
And it's sort of based on these prediction markets, cryptocurrency-based prediction markets, based on this paper that was written by Paul Stortz in 2013, December 2013, called TruthCoin.
Yeah, but also not just inspired by that, but also inspired by a 2013 Robin Hanson paper that Shayne Coplan also later says inspired him for Polymarket. And just to tie all of what we've discussed together into this before you go deeper into Augur, foundational and inspirational to Augur was DARPA's Policy Analysis Market, or PAM.
Right.
So much so that when they created Augur, they're like, what should our logo be?
Right.
And it's literally the same logo as the Information Awareness Office, the one-eye pyramid.
And then was there an important guy that worked at PAM that then helped advise Augur?
Yes, Robin Hanson
himself.
Robin
Hanson himself. Oh, interesting. And were there other interesting advisors to Augur that might be relevant
that were
to this
also
story?
Involved with Pam? Yes, Mark.
Oh, wow.
The InTrade guy.
Oh, wow, that's right. And then also an advisor to Augur and the first investor, or the first couple investors, was Vitalik Buterin, right? And he was the guy that created Ethereum. And
had been a Thiel fellow.
He created Ethereum as a Thiel fellow, right? And so then he's investing. He comes to Joey Krug, who's working on this stuff. Augur initially was going to be probably Bitcoin-based, and Vitalik's like, no, don't do it like that. What you want to do, you want these nice smart contracts, more expressive. Come over here to ETH. I'm building ETH. It's going to be great. So before ETH is even out, he's like, come to ETH. He's on a Thiel fellowship from, I think it was 2013, to build Ethereum, which launches in 2014. And then Krug is working on Augur in 2014. He switches over to ETH because this Thiel fellow's like, come over here. Krug then gets a Thiel fellowship in 2016 to develop Augur, which is interesting. And at the time, he co-founded Augur with this, with a data scientist from Berkeley, and then with another young kid, Jeremy Gardner, who ends up becoming a partner at Blockchain Capital, which is heavily featured in the Chain series, co-founded by Tether co-founder
Brock Pierce. But while they're doing this, he's arguing online, and he literally says, I can publicly say that the CIA, DARPA, and the DoD are huge fans of Augur.
Huge!
Which is, just great cue poll, quiet part out loud there. So the Thiel nexus is in there, the Ethereum nexus is in there. Augur ends up becoming the first ICO. ICO being initial coin offering, it's analogous to the IPO, initial public offering, which is sort of how a company goes public. And they recreated this model, a fundraising model, public fundraising model, but for crypto tokens. And so Augur is actually the first one on ETH, which is a huge deal. And so REP is their token, the REP, which obviously is used in the Augur back end as a way, at least in the first edition of it, as a way to, use these prediction-based markets using cryptocurrency. And Krug speaks, a lot to this. So the first version of Augur is super clunky. It kind of stinks. But they raised millions and millions and millions of dollars with this REP token. And first iteration, which I believe launched in 2018, was really crappy. And it was hard to use. But interestingly, maybe intentionally, but interestingly, right before it launches, but after the ICO, so they make tons and tons and tons of money, Joey Krug joins Pantera, which was founded by Dan Moorhead. It's one of these like Tiger Cub VC firms. He joins it in 2017 as co-chief investment officer. And he writes this big blog post about why he's joining and how he's like, this isn't going to hurt Augur. It's good for Augur. In fact, we're going to be trading on it. And we're not doing it as charity. We're doing it to make a lot of money. And actually, we're on there to make a lot of money. It's not charity. And we have an edge in this market, much like we have an edge in the Bitcoin market. And that's why we're doing this. So like already from the get-go, huge VC firms, some of the most important ones are involved. They're trading on these platforms before they're even really like viable products that people can use. And they're admitting they have an edge and they're making a bunch of money on it and they're doing it to make money on it, right? So this is all happening before version 2 even launches, which if I recall, version 2 was 2020. And version 2 launches with, now it has stablecoin access. So one of the issues with the first version of Augur is it uses Ethereum and this REP token, which have really crazy volatile price swings because it's just the price of these tokens. So if you're in a bet, you're actually unfortunately exposed not only to the bet outcome, but to the volatility of the underlying token. So by switching it to DAI, which is, the stable coin from MakerDAO, heavily worked on by Nikolai Michelin, who, we've written about in the Chain series. I wrote about it in my book, The Bitcoin
Probably
Dollar.
Murdered by
Very
the
likely
CIA.
murdered by the CIA. But regardless, 2020, they launched with DAI, and the stablecoins sort of eliminate a lot of these issues. Prediction markets could not exist without cryptocurrency for many reasons, but one of them being that there's a legislative issue and a fraud issue. Legislation being, it's illegal. There was the Internet Act, the Internet Protection Act or something like that, where they basically made it illegal for people to process money for offshore gambling. And so they had to figure out a way to get around this. And this was a big issue that a lot of these early ones like InTrade dealt with. And so one of the ways they get around it is you use cryptocurrency. It's a great workaround. You don't have to use credit cards. You don't have to do these things. And then also, because you're not using credit cards and because cryptocurrency transactions are functionally almost definitely irreversible. Obviously, there's the infamous call Joe Lubin line from Howard Lutnick saying, if you want something frozen on Ethereum, call Joe Lubin. But it's a lot harder to reverse a transaction. So if these guys are making bets on Polymarket or on Augur, in this case, using DAI, it's really hard to reverse the transactions if a bet maker tries to do some fraud. Whereas if it was a credit card, they could call and say, I didn't place this bet, and the credit card company will take the money back.
Right.
You can't really do that with Augur. So Augur does DAI in 2020, and then Augur Turbo comes out in 2021, notably after Polymarket's founded in 2020. And as a way to solve a lot of these clunky issues of how slow the platform is and all that, they integrate Chainlink as the Oracle provider who actually determines the outcome. And then they use an Ethereum layer 2 Polygon. Interestingly, both of those are what Polymarket uses, which is kind of interesting. So at this time, he's at Pantera. He's trading on Augur, then they upgrade it, then they upgrade it again. Now it's basically what Polymarket is today.
But like who why did this new version of Augur, even though it was so much better and they like fixed their previous problems, why did it fail?
Well, they sort of broke it all down and they pieced it, broke down the assets and they sold it off actually to Coinbase, who then admittedly didn't have because they had created the Forecast Foundation, which was the nonprofit behind Augur, and then they created like a VC firm on it, and Augmented Partners, I believe is what it was called, and then they created a DEX using the OX model, which had all these investors, all these similar Reid Hoffman and Andreessen and all these guys were involved in this. And then they sold it off to Coinbase, and admittedly in this interview that we link in the article, they say that Coinbase didn't have a plan for it beyond 2 months. And they just brought it there to take all the patents and the technology,
and to kill it,
which was licensed from InTrade. Augur got a bunch of, they gave a bunch of rep tokens to InTrade, which then traded all those for ETH. And now InTrade has this huge ETH stash, very interestingly, from the ICO. But anyways, and now the guy's just like soft retired because he made millions of dollars. But they purposely shipped it off and sunset it, sold the assets off to Coinbase, and then basically relaunched this all with Polymarket using USDC and Chainlink and Polygon.
All right, so let's go back then to the founding of Polymarket, right? So the official narrative that we've already discussed as being bunk is that Mr. Shayne is, COVID's happening, it's lockdowns, there's so much uncertainty. It's the best time for prediction markets, and I'm just so passionate about prediction markets. I'm going to will it into existence by being in my bathroom, all alone in my bathroom, and just coding. And I made Polymarket in my bathroom. And just, it's just, I don't know. I don't know why that's the narrative they want to sell so bad, because it's like, dude, bathroom. Because I mean,
literally stinks.
Well, it used to be like the garage, right? We built this company in our garage, and now they've gone to we can't do the garage anymore. So now it's the bathroom. I don't know. It's just so weird. Anyway, so obviously we know that he had all these connections, particularly the people that sort of bridged the U.S.-Israeli crypto tech scene. And basically had remolded or was working in the process of, going from token union, which kind of became irrelevant when Ethereum was moving
to proof of stake.
They didn't really need the
Ethereum proof of stake, like debugging in the code was done with Antithesis, which is a DC-based Palantir subcontractor that was in stealth the whole time. So
some more Thiel connections there.
The chain.wiki.
And so basically, he has all these connections anyway when he is creating it. And it's not, we didn't put this in part 1, it'll be in part 2, but there's an interview that he gave in 2020 where he said a lot of the passion for the creation of Polymarket from him and his team was DARPA's policy analysis market.
Right. Yep.
And even though he's alone in his bathroom building this company ostensibly with no connections, as he says, he somehow raises $4 million just 3 months after the company launches. And the main people backing him are Coinbase's earliest employees. So remember, Coinbase takes Augur and sunsets it. So these people that, they left Coinbase, but they were still connected to it. So one example is One Confirmation, which is created by one of Coinbase's earliest employees, Nick Tomeno. And he, right away invests in ETH and also invests in Coinbase right back in the company he left. And then, dumps money into Polymarket.
And interestingly, Polymarket uses USDC. 50% of all profits from USDC's issuer circle goes to Coinbase because they're the main investor. So it's another. And then another Coinbase's literal earliest employee, Olaf Carlson he also is the main investor in there. So the Coinbase bros. And there's another Coinbase guy that's there also in 2020 in the seed round. So all these Coinbase guys got in really early with Shayne and Polymarket. And $4 million, and then Coinbase on the other side
sort of sunsets their competitor for them. And by that time, Joey Krug had left.
Right.
And
where did he go?
In Founders Fund.
Oh,
Peter
Founders
Thiel's Founders Fund.
Oh,
and
wow.
then they end up leading one of the series rounds for Polymarket pretty early on.
Wow.
Yeah, so...
there was that whole thing where he was like, they were messaging each other because Coplan was like, I don't like Augur, and, there's a lot of issues with it, but hey, but I have all these other ideas, Polymarket's going to do better, and Krug's like, listen, I'm a big investor guy now. I don't really do Augur anymore. I'm like an advisor for like things like Ampleforth and whatever. If you make $5 million a month, in volume, like hit me up and then I'll invest. Sure as shit, they hit the $5 million a month. Krug, he joined Founders Fund in 2023. He leads the Series A, and
but basically,
the rest is history.
Yeah. So basically, since we're kind of running out of time here, it's. Augur was an attempt to resurrect PAM. It failed, but true to the Napsterization model, we have Augur being the predecessor to Polymarket, just like Napster was to Spotify. And literally, they have said this.
Yes.
Krug has said this.
Yes. Coplan has said this.
Yeah, they have said this.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's important to note here, and I think the last point I want to end with here is about what the significance of this is, and a lot of that part 2 is going to be sort of necessary to unpack in its entirety, this idea. But what was PAM? PAM was part, or the policy analysis market, what these guys have been trying to resurrect. It was part of TIA. And TIA, Total Information Awareness, the goal was not just to see everything going on in the present, and find anomalies, find the bad guys in a sea of data, of everyone's data in mass surveillance. It was to predict. It was pre-crime. It was predictive policing on a massive scale, and not in pretty much every ambit of human life you can think of, right? And so Polymarket, because the market knows all of these Polymarket odds. Just like with PAM, the odds are there to help feed the pre-crime engine. This is what will happen.
Right.
Or this will not. And we know that Polymarket bets can be rigged, and that Polymarket itself puts out misinformation sometimes to make trades swing one way or the other, and that insider trading is a huge problem. And the context of that, and as it's meant to interface with what is now Palantir, is really unsettling. And lo and behold, if you look it up, dude, it's there. Polymarket and Palantir are partners. They are partnered and they work together for the market integrity. So this has already happened. And this is the privatized panopticon.
And not only privatized, they're going to commercialize it. They're making money off it. Insider trading is not a problem. It's a feature.
It's a feature, not a bug. Hanson says that, but these guys also say it too. And we'll explore more.
So
of
part
that
2, of course, we will discuss a lot of these initial founding principles and philosophies that led to, let's build out all this tech, let's build out cryptocurrency, which probably came from the Thielverse anyway, then let's get ETH so we can make tokens, then we can create smart contracts, then we can create prediction markets with irreversible transactions, and then we'll make stable coins, which is the same nexus. Bill Gross and Epstein were talking about having Tether being founded, and all of these mechanisms that were necessary to create today's Polymarket came out of this nexus of, we're going to create a new form of governance based on prediction market. Which is futurarchy, the idea of a new governance form, exactly, and the implications of that and its interactions with neo-reactionary thought and that influence on the current Trump administration. This is very important stuff. And there's actually been efforts by the current Trump administration where they've already been implementing these ideas, and it's probably only going to get crazier from here on out because, of course, the Trump family personally involved with Polymarket and its and Kalshi, its main competitor. All of this and more coming to you in both the part 2 article, and I'm sure we'll have to do another rip on this. Oh, totally. There's a lot of detail, and we just tried to give an overview. But basically, it's taken them 25 years to get to this point. And they're not giving up now. No, they're not giving up now, but a lot of their success of what is a very dystopian plan for governance and mass surveillance hinges on people buying the official narratives of what these companies are. 100%. So it's more important than ever to scrutinize and break apart those narratives when they are not true. Case in point. So that's what we're doing at Unlimited Hangout.
And so, this is our first episode.
Yeah.
We would like to hear what you thought about it and how we can, improve, get you to subscribe, hopefully.
The best website in the world, unlimitedhangout.com/join. Join us there, become a member. You'll get early access to all this stuff, early access to articles, to pods. Come chat with us, ask us questions. But yeah, thanks for hanging out on our first episode. Thanks for having me, Whitney.
Of course. I have a feeling I'll see you again on our next episode. And thanks to everyone for watching. We really appreciate you stopping by. And Unlimited Hangouts on video. Yay! Woo-hoo!